to the 3% Podcast, a podcast brought to you by the University of Rochester and Open Letter. I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and today I'm joined by three special guests. We have Caitlin Luce Baker from Island Books out in Seattle. We have Dan Wells, publisher of Biblioasis from Canada. And we have James Crossley from Madison Books out in Seattle as well. And we are going to be doing a special 4th of July podcast in which all we're doing is picking our favorite baseball books. So we're going to jump right in a way, but I'll let each of you say a few words first about like how you're doing, what's going on. And if you have any fun baseball anecdotes or stories about your favorite teams, that's awesome as well. I am not going to start this because my team, the Cardinals, are a piece of shit, and I can't even bother paying attention to them at this moment in time because it's so bad, although fun to watch them lose over and over and over again in new and disturbing ways. But let's start with you, Caitlin. You not only you have a long baseball history, I know, because we've talked about your fandom and teams that you like, but you also mentioned that you had volunteered at the All-Star game when it was in Seattle last time, and it'll be there again next week.
Next week.
What's the story there?
Okay, so it was 2001. The Mariners were actually really good that year, and I went to a ton of games. Probably went to about half the games because it was really cheap to sit in the bleachers, either the center field or left field bleachers. But I found out you could volunteer at the All-Star game, so I volunteered. You had like three choices, and my top choice was the Hall of Fame booth. And I was on crutches because I had a bungled knee. So the other two people were kind of like in front, and the guy, one was the vice president of the Hall of Fame at that time, who was Ted Williams. His parents obviously were from Boston. And then the director of the library of the Hall of Fame, and I'm missing his name, and then there was another guy who was like his assistant there. So they invited me to sit at the table with them. Wow. And talk baseball. And at first I was like kind of nervous. It's like president of the Hall of Fame and the director of the library, and then the library assistant. But it was a lot of fun. It was almost a little bit overwhelming being in this place because of course I didn't go to the All-Star game because it would have had to buy tickets to a bookseller. But being, I think, at the Fan Fest part and the Hall of Fame was just an amazing experience. And talking baseball with some of the best minds in baseball in 2001 was phenomenal. So it was pretty amazing. I would just kind of like walk by, so to speak, and catch part of people from the Negro Leagues talking.
Oh, wow.
Which was just amazing to see them. And I probably cried because it was like, I don't know if anyone's still alive from the Negro Leagues at this point. I guess is probably not. I haven't checked. And people from the Women's Baseball League is talking. And you players kind of walking around enjoying it. It was just pretty amazing to be part of that at that time. But one of the other kind of goofy, going back to my childhood experiences, as I was like outside the stadium the day of the All-Star game, and I was actually leaving the area to go watch the game at home. And all the mascots are outside, including the Philly Fanatic, and it kind of freaked out.
So you are a Phillies fan, right?
Yeah, I mean the Phillies were my first team, and the Red Sox.
At least one of those is a reasonable team to be a fan of.
Well, I don't know they're actually either of them that good right now, but that doesn't matter. That's okay. Part of being a baseball fan.
True.
So, one of the books, I can go on more about that, but one of the books at that time, which is really heavy, and I can lift it up so everyone can see it. It's probably not, it's really heavy. Oh God, this is
whoa.
The book that was at the table. This is the cultural history of baseball, which I
think looks heavy.
Of.
Man,
Yeah, it's massive.
It is massive. And it's chock full of just kind of interesting facts about baseball, about every aspect of the sport, from stadiums to history to baseball to players, and little anecdotes. I've always been a fan of the change up in the knuckleball pitches because maybe I could throw them, but probably not. But there's a funny quote from Lou Piniella, who managed, of course, was a Yankees hero for years, but also managed the Mariners for years and managed the Mariners in 2000, 2001, and before that. But there's this funny quote about him and the changeup, that it was like hitting a stuffed panda. Quote. Anyway, it's close to the quote. So it is an absolutely fascinating book, which possibly because of the internet is not as needed, but to have all this
I don't
kind of
believe
tips. Yeah, I mean, it's a cool book. I didn't check to see if it was still in print. But that, I think after the hanging out at the table at the baseball all-star game, my dad was like, well, what do you want for your birthday? And I was like, I want this book.
Very cool. I think even with the internet, you need something to collect those things. You don't know what to look up, but with stuff like that, it needs to be kind of gathered. It's what makes a lot of that, like Twitter and like baseball Twitter and baseball Instagram, kind of fun, is that the stuff might be out there, but you don't necessarily, you need it curated and presented to you. And I know you, Dan, as a publisher of several baseball books, are a fond believer in the books of baseball. And why don't you go with talk about what you're up to these days, and then you can take your pick.
And I can take my pick.
Sure.
You want the pick right now? Okay.
No, introduce yourself first. Talk about yourself first.
All right. Well, I am a publisher because I couldn't be a pitcher. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I was I came to baseball fairly late. I was 11 or 12. I was like most of us, a bookworm, until my uncle took pity on me and brought me to see a game in 1983 against the Boston Red Sox, and I fell in love with the game. And I shortly thereafter met I started throwing the ball against the brick wall like we all did back then, determined to be a pitcher. And it was only after meeting like Fergie Jenkins, who I'll talk about a little later today, that I realized I do not have the hands to pull this off. I can hold a pen, cannot hold a baseball. I never learned to throw a knuckleball or a changeup either, Caitlin. They're not as easy as it seems. Can't play baseball, so I'm in books. Bookseller for 25 years this week. I opened the Biblioasis bookshop 25 years ago, around July 7th, I think. And 20 years publishing. And yeah, we've done some baseball books, a few of which I'll talk about shortly.
Okay, well, we'll go through introductions, and we'll go through our picks next. So, James,
okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. James Crossley, you're wearing a Cardinals shirt of sorts.
I am wearing. This is the only Cardinals gear you will ever see me wearing, because I hate the Cardinals almost as much as I hate the Yankees. But I do love St. Louis, and in particular, one of the people in it. And anyway, she went to the stadium on St. Louis Shakespeare Festival night, where they were giving out pictures, T-shirts with pictures of Shakespeare wearing the Cardinals hat. And it's got a quote from Macbeth about fair is foul and foul is fair. So I was like, okay, I will wear the Cardinals gear for that.
That is a great T-shirt.
Yeah,
very cool.
My baseball fandom started pretty early. Although I mostly grew up in Arizona, where there was not a major league team, so I was kind of a fan of the sport in general, which I appreciate now. Like I didn't have a particular attachment to a local team. I was just really interested in the game in general and the history of the game. Like my favorite player for years growing up was Lou Gehrig at a time, at an age when people were like, who's that? He's dead. That's my history with it. And I've loved it ever since. One of my favorite moments at a game was during one of Ichiro's early seasons with the Mariners at the stadium here in Seattle, and a totally meaningless game that the Mariners were behind in against the Yankees, and in the late innings, they scratched and they got somebody on base, and I was thinking, oh, Ichiro's coming up if he's good for a single, right? And Mariano Rivera was on the mound. So of course, chances are slim, but he ends up homering to win the game, which the crowd went nuts for. And I had on my shoulder at the time my infant son who had fallen asleep about inning 6, and so everyone around very graciously cheered quietly as they all leapt to their feet, kind of open-throated but voiceless. Then here's the saddest thing about all this. That incident appeared at the stadium years later on this highlight reel of like top 10 Mariner moments. Like in the whole history of the franchise, the best thing, they couldn't even get down to like past 9 without this. Well, Ichiro hit a home run in a meaningless midseason game that was pretty exciting. So that's, it's like we got to the playoffs that one time, and then there was another good game, and then, your Cardinals have like, well, there's all our World Series wins and everything else. We just have.
You're actually making me feel better about being a Tiger fan, for that matter.
Oh yeah,
I'll take it easy on Seattle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Seattle's fun though. Seattle's fun. J-Rod's fun. They're fun.
We're a likable bunch.
Yeah, people get really excited when they make the playoffs too, and that's nice.
I will mention I am going to a sort of, I guess it's probably an all-star game related event this weekend that I just heard about. It's called the HBCU Swingman Classic, which somehow Ken Griffey Jr. is involved with, and it's an all-star game for players from the historically Black colleges and universities. That I guess they're going to do this regularly, and at T-Mobile Park, and general admission, cheap seats, so you get to sit where the rich people do and watch a fun game.
That's amazing.
I'm looking forward to that.
That's really cool. That's really cool. If there was anything with the All-Star game I would go to, it would be the Futures game. I love seeing that.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to go to back in 2001, and I would still go to it, but
it's expensive now.
Yeah. I didn't even look at tickets.
Well, Dan, you'll be happy to know that I, having grown up in Michigan, was a fan of the Tigers in 1984, which was,
as we all were.
Which was a good year.
It was a good year to have as your first year of being a baseball fan, that's for sure.
Yeah, and then I immediately switched. Like, I immediately didn't want to be a fan of those. I didn't want to be a fan of any local team. I didn't strangely, I know this doesn't really track with any other part of my personality, but I didn't want to be part of like the common crowd of people that wanted to be contrarian in some way. But I fell in love with the Cardinals through Ozzie Smith and Vince Coleman, Willie McGee, and they were on like baseball game of the week every week, and they were fast and they were small and they didn't hit a lot of home runs, and like all very much could relate to that. So I got into that side of things. But you mentioned best baseball moment. My favorite baseball moment live was in 2006. There happened to be a conference about French stuff in St. Louis during the World Series. And when I knew I was going to it to be part of some presentation, I forget what I don't even know what the point of it was at this moment in time at all. But when I figured out that I was going, I was like, well, if the Cardinals were to win in 5 games against the Tigers, I could be in St. Louis when they win. And not only did that all play out, but I was able to sneak into the stadium in the 9th inning and watch Adam Wainwright strike out the final batter, and the explosions and everything went off, and it was like pure sheer chaos. And it's like one of those things that, so lucky to be able to experience, and very rare for most any fan, not only that your team would win any major sport, but that you could actually be there at the moment that it happens. But that was really fun. And breaking into a stadium is like, that's a top 10. That's a top 10 moment. But
I had tickets to Game 6. And my only chance to go to a World Series game. I had tickets to Game 6. So I was there when Cabrera hit the home run that put them into the and I mean, I think you can see my friend Santa hat in the highlight reel.
Oh,
We were
really?
right there where the ball landed. So that's probably one of my highlight memories too.
That's super cool. That's super cool. So anyway, so let's start picking some books, but I want to take, oh, what's up, James?
Oh no, I have Mariners World Series tickets from 2001, which of course they didn't get to, but when you bought the playoff package, you had to buy the tickets for the whole, the whole schmear just in case. And even when they bounced out, it's like, well, so I still have this little piece of paper.
Oh, that's so cool. That's a good.
I go to a couple. I went to one playoff game in 2001. I think that was the year I might have camped out, or I went down to Safeco. As crazy as it is, because it was 2001, which isn't really. I guess it is that long ago, but I found out, the people sleeping out, and I was like, I'm just gonna go down, and I met up with some people and just hung out, and ended up in the outfield. I believe it was 2000. Anyway, I'd have to look up the game. And
still people camping out in front of the stadium there, but they're not ticket buyers. They're people who can't afford Seattle housing prices. So
yeah, which is just about all of us. And it was a game Roger Clemens almost threw a no-hitter against the Mariners in the playoffs. James, do you remember that was 2000 or 2001? I was in the outfield. Not.
I think that was 2001.
It should be 2000.
2000? Yeah. Yeah, that was. I hate Roger.
So before I want to take.
Correction. I gotta say one thing because I screwed it up. It was not Cabrera who hit the home run. It was Ordonez.
Oh,
I mean, if I did not correct that, somebody would have corrected it afterwards. So
our listeners are diehards. They will correct. Obviously, every single baseball faux pas that we could make will be corrected. We're gonna get started, but I want to pull one book off because I was trying to do research for this and typing in like best baseball books that are great about baseball fiction. And the one that came up first was a book that Tom Roberge and I talked about 100 years ago, which is Baseball Genius by Derek Jeter. Which is, I don't know if you remember the time in which Derek Jeter got his own publishing line as part of Simon and Schuster. And this book is about a kid, Jalen DeLuca, who loves baseball but can't afford to stay on the travel team. So he sneaks into the home of New York Yankees star second baseman James Yeager and steals a couple of balls from his personal batting cages. But he gets caught. And so Yeager finds out that this kid has a secret, his baseball genius. Quote, he can analyze and predict almost exactly what a pitcher is going to do with his next pitch. He can't quite explain how he knows, he just knows. And after proving to Yeager that he can really do this using a televised game and predicting pitch after pitch with perfect accuracy, the two agree to a deal. Jalen will help Yeager out of his batting slump and Yeager won't press charges. I still think it's just amazing.
How did I miss this?
I did too.
I think it was in kids' books when those came out. When did those come out? Like 2008?
2010-ish?
It doesn't. 10-ish, yeah, 2010. I was working at University Bookstore in the kids section when those came out. I think there were only a couple.
2018.
No, really? Wow.
Part of Jeter Publishing, of which includes like the Contract series, complete paperback collection, and other titles such as Hit and Miss and Curveball. really provocative. Good stuff. So
you're gonna have to take that off.
We can't choose that, is what you're saying.
Can't choose that. That is now eliminated from the board. Baseball Genius gone.
Yeah. So yeah, it wouldn't be fair to the other books.
Wouldn't be fair. Obviously we're all going to choose that first. So just make that a kind of a one for all of us. Caitlin, your turn. Go.
Okay. Well, I kind of talked about one book already, which is possibly irrelevant now, but maybe not. So James might also have this in his stack, but The Brothers K. This is which I haven't read since 1998 or 97. But this is by David James Duncan, and I think it was his first book, and it's set mostly in the Pacific Northwest. about a man who's a baseball player, and it's mostly set in the farm links. And I was looking through it because I haven't read it in a while. But I remember, and it was really what a good book it is, and how it's funny, but it's also about America and about striving to be someone and to have this dream, but falling short of this dream. And it
would have been on my list somewhere. Definitely. That's a great book.
Yeah, it is a great book. And his kids
selling that at the bookstore, but I never read it because I thought you needed to have a big working familiarity with Brothers Karamazov before you could even enter into the world of the Brothers K. So I sold it, but never read it.
Yeah, other than the title, there's not a whole lot of Dostoevsky in there, I don't think.
No,
it's mostly about fathers and sons in a family, and he's injured early on and doesn't quite make it, but a lot of it is set in the farm teams. A lot of it takes place in Washington State and in Oregon, and briefly in Schenectady, New York, where I grew up, where he is traded. And I wish I had kind of reread this. I'm like, this is really good. But there's a lot about literature in here. There's one point where his two sons have, they taken, there's a lot of mentions of classic American novels like Fanny and Zoe, and Salinger, but it's so better.
Nice.
So that's one of mine in the Cultural Encyclopedia of Baseball. And also, as I was thinking about it, there was like today I was like, oh, the book about Mo Berg, which somebody else might be talking about, which is a fascinating biography about the catcher who was a spy.
The catcher was a spy, yeah. Mo Berg.
Yeah. I probably read that. And probably one of the earliest baseball books I read that was not a straight, biography of like Carl Yastrzemski or something, was Jim Bouton's Ball 4, which I definitely read when I was way too young to understand a lot of it, and not a Yankee fan. My dad gave it to me to read when I was probably 11, but I have this distinct memory of sitting on the porch one summer and reading it.
Nice.
And years later, the book was reissued. And Bouton came just before I was even working at University Bookstore. He came to University Bookstore and did a signing.
Oh, very cool.
And so I got to meet him, and it was pretty cool. And I wish I had it. I think it's in a box in a little storage.
Yeah, I have no props for this. Dan, you want to make your first pick?
Sure. Well, I mean, every pennant contender needs a good keystone combination. And my first pair wasn't Trammell and Sweet Lou Whitaker, but two very young brothers, Spike and Bob, who play second and short for the Brooklyn Dodgers in John Artunis's The Keystone Kid. So I start with a YA book that I kind of discovered right around the time. It was, my uncle who lived in my grandmother's basement took me to this Tiger game, September 26, 1983, whatever. Not that it made a mark on me. And shortly thereafter, scanning the shelves, I see this baseball book, and I read it. And I read it every year for 5 or 6 years, and I loved it. It tells the story of two brothers, like I said, who make it to the bigs to play for the bumbling Brooklyn Bums, otherwise known as the Dodgers, and transform the team into a playoff contender. The elder brother, Spike, becomes player manager, even though he's really young. And I can no longer remember if they actually win the series, but it doesn't matter because, it was a fun ride. And I read this last to my boys who are now, 18 and 20, maybe a decade or so ago. And perhaps out of nostalgia, I loved it all over again. I was also surprised to see it grappling with all sorts of other issues. I remembered it just being this sort of baseball story of the season, but it actually was exploring race and anti-Semitism. There's a Jewish catcher who joins the team halfway through the year, and the team becomes divided and falls apart and starts bumbling around like they were before before the Keystone team brothers joined. And I was kind of really surprised at this at first. And then when I kind of looked into the history of it, I saw that it was published in 1942, 2 years after the start of World War II and a year after the U.S. entered the Second World War. So, it all kind of made sense. I was almost certain this book would be in print. I mean, it's been through so many different reprints. I think I have an original edition of the 42 Harcourt and Brace. But it does seem out of print. I don't publish YA books, but anybody watching this who does should probably consider bringing it back. I mean, it was a great baseball story.
Absolutely. I remember reading a bunch of sport baseball books as a kid, but I can't think of who the author was. But there was someone who produced like a ton of those kind of like kids like on the edge, becomes like a success, sort of like rags to riches sports stories. But I can't think of what the name of any of them were, but I remember devouring them because they were all a lot fun. But
so this guy wrote primarily about football and other stories. I mean, a lot of his stuff all American, and it just didn't appeal the same. Yeah. But
James, you're up.
Thanks. I should start off by saying I completely overprepared for this because I'm so fired up. I have a spreadsheet. I can go deep enough to find a Mike Piazza.
Did you? I remember that Mike Piazza. Oh yeah. Did you stick metrics the shit out of this? Because that's what I.
Yeah, I've got. I mean, and every time somebody mentions a book, I'm like, oh, there's this other one I knocked off my list, but that reminds me of the other one, that kind of thing. And the person I wanted to sort of throw out entirely is Roger Angell. So I feel like every Roger Angell book should be on the list. Probably the greatest baseball writer ever.
Yeah.
Just lucid prose. One of the highest artisans to ever, take on sports writing as a subject. So I was like, which book? And I was like, no, I'm just going to skip him. We won't even count him, maybe. So he's not my first pick, but he could have been. So I'm going to go with my first pick as A False Spring by Pat Jordan, a memoir. So Pat Jordan became a sports writer and journalist in later life, but he was a baseball phenom. And so A False Spring is his memoir of almost striking it rich. He was a kind of contemporary of like a Tom Seaver. He wrote very humorously in later years about, hanging out with Tom Seaver, as older men and telling him, his fastball was better than Tom's and all this kind of stuff. But like the Brothers K, it touches on those most important baseball things, which are, sort of fathers and sons. There's troubled relationships, within the family, but also failure. All great baseball stories are about failure, because more than you hit, right? And so he was a bust, and he was mostly a bust of his own doing. He had issues with injuries and stuff, but he didn't have his head screwed on right, and which he admits in a very thoughtful way as he's writing about it as an older man. Priorities weren't in order. Not that he did anything completely drastic, but his just attitude was that the world was his oyster and was supposed to be served up to him on a plate, and so he didn't know what he needed to do at that next level. And so when he didn't make it, knowing what to do, and he luckily turned out to be as good a writer as he was a baseball player. So great book. He wrote a follow-up memoir called A Nice Tuesday, which was about sort of a comeback phase. He pitched in the independent minors when he was in his 60s or something crazy. Anyway, he wrote a lot of great sports writing about other people, but those memoirs are the best thing he did.
Very cool. Very cool. I did not think my first pick would make it to this. I over produced a list because I knew I would go last, and I was like, there's not a chance that this book will be on the board by the time it gets to me. But my first pick is the Universal Baseball Association Incorporated, J. Law Proprietor by Robert Coover, which is the greatest book about non-existent baseball ever to be written. For anyone who hasn't read it, it's a slim Coover book about a guy who's pretty friendless and creates a very elaborate dice rolling game to manufacture season after season after season, which he details in like incredible, writes out in incredible detail day by day as he goes home and plays out that day of the season and all the various games. And the big thing that sets everything in motion is that through a sequence of particular dice rolls, the pitcher in one of the games gets hit by a line drive and dies. And that sets in motion his whole existential questioning of like what he's doing and his control over these imaginary fantasy baseball people, which I can relate to. I used to, I'll admit, like as a very weird nerd, I created a little dice rolling game as a kid too, to try and figure out a way to play baseball. And we didn't have like, you know, an Atari, or even if we did have an Atari, there was no like cool baseball game. Well, at that point in time, this is like
Atari baseball sucked.
Yeah, really sucked. Even like RBI baseball for the Apple IIc was a pile of shit. So like, yeah, we've come a long ways, but that was the way to do it. But that as a book about, as like a book about someone's obsession with baseball is absolutely fantastic and amazing. So that's my first pick.
You were yes.
Oh,
I will. When I was looking this up, I believe it's out of print.
Hey, shh. We have the contracts in process.
Oh, good. Okay.
Nobody try and scoop that. I have grudges. I have means. I will get you. But yeah, it's in process.
Fantastic. Good. I was hoping for that kind of answer.
Yep. Caitlin, you're up.
Okay. I think I have 3 books, but this is The Physics of Baseball. I know only you can see this, which seems like it's still in print, but it's back ordered. It's published by Harper. My copy is from 2003, or has receipt from 2003. But there was a while I gave a number of people this for presents, whether they liked it or not, I'm not sure. I found it pretty fascinating because it gets into the science of baseball and how physics and bat weight and pitches and nature, wind, everything kind of plays a part in how a game plays out.
Yeah. Because
this was written so long ago, I mean, I would love to see a new edition. I don't know the author is even still alive, but it was written by Robert Adair.
There's not another book version of that, but just double checking. I don't think so. There might be, but Alan Nathan from the University of Illinois has a whole blog called The Physics of Baseball. That is very nerdy about like, he goes on the Effectively Wild podcast rather regularly, or not regularly, but every so often he's referred to, but a lot of stuff related to like the bounciness or the elasticity of the baseball, all the kind of things that have gone into like the science of that, because he's a physicist first and a baseball fan as well, and falls into that. So there's like, I don't know if there's a book, but there's at least a place that has some increased data and research, which is pretty cool. But I love that. It's like the anti-sabermetrics thing in a way. Like you go from like Moneyball to now like the actual properties of like swing plane and exit velocity and the physicality nature part of baseball again, which is fun.
Yeah, and I think that's why it fascinated me, that it was just a different approach to looking at the game, that it's not just you can have the best pitcher up there, but if the wind's going a certain way, or the heat, and is the smoke pit that we deal with now, everyone is dealing with now, playing a role in how the game is played. Probably, I can't imagine playing baseball in the middle of like when you can't breathe.
There's the humidor, the Colorado and Arizona humidor factor that now is like for every single ballpark. Yeah, it's interesting. Right. All the stuff with the baseball changes over the past 5 years has been fascinating to me, where they made it more bouncy and now like toned it down, but they don't talk about it. And the commissioner sort of vaguely alludes to things of the ball's always been the same, but it's kind of different now, blah, 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 blah. Like all that stuff is very interesting and makes like huge differences in people's performance. like those home run years are out of control when the ball was like just flying. Like you could be my size and hit like 48 home runs, but you know, you could,
Yeah, Dustin Pedroia,
yeah, yeah.
laser show.
So
I kind of
Dan, what do you pick?
Well, as I said, you've already touched on this one, James. I mean, my first baseball season was 1983. I go to my first game, I think probably in the Tigers' last homestand. So my first full season is 1984, and they could do no wrong. They go 35-5 before failing in Seattle. So, like I said, fuck Seattle. I've hated Seattle. I've hated the Twins, ghost of 87, ever since. But despite Seattle, there wasn't a lot of failure to worry about in 1984. So when I was throwing that ball against the school wall or, swinging a bat in the churchyard, I wasn't thinking of failure. I was thinking of dreaming of greatness, coming through in the clutch, never letting my teammates, not that I had any at that moment, down. But if I am anything these days, I'm a Tiger fan. And since 1988, that team has taught me a great deal about failure, as has Mark Kingwell in his book on baseball and philosophy, Fail Better, Why Baseball Matters. Kingwell is a great watcher of the game. He both reminded me of things I forgot and made me see things new. Baseball, he makes clear, is all about failure. I mean, the greatest hitter to ever play the game, Ty Cobb, a Tiger naturally, only got on base 64% of the time. Bill Buckner was a fierce player, compiling nearly 3,000 hits, striking out only 450 times in his MLB career. But what do we remember him for? I don't even need to say it. And it's probably the reason why he didn't get into the MLB and the Hall of Fame, which he should have. A lot of lesser players have made it. Kingwell shows, I think, that the beauty of the game is built on this relationship to failure and that it matters for various layers of meaning that it can give to a life. So as a person who in recent years has kind of fallen out of love with baseball, something I didn't think would have been possible when I was a kid, maybe I should read this book again. It's definitely still in print because we published it.
Yeah, I read that book. I like that book. I like Mark a lot. He's very smart.
He wrote, there's a piece in the Globe and Mail not tied to baseball you should read about him and drinking. It's one of the best things about drinking and addiction and everything else I've read in a very long time. Just search Kingwell and drinking for the Globe and Mail. It's pretty powerful stuff.
Amazing. James, you're up.
Yeah. All right. I had that one on my list somewhere, but I knew I would, I wasn't going to take it from Dan. I figured
Thank you.
You'd have that.
I only had so many. I didn't know we could talk about books we hadn't read. So.
Oh, just wait.
Come on. Welcome to bookselling, Dan.
Fair enough.
I will put in a side plug for a couple of books I have read. Another Canadian essayist, Andrew Forbes.
Yeah, he's great.
These little books, short essays, The Utility of Boredom, I think it is, and The Only Way is the Steady Way, which has several pieces in it about our boy Ichiro. So more great essays. I think I'm going to go for my pick back to fiction, and I'm going to go with there were two that were tied, basically. I'm going to elevate The Celebrant by Eric Rolf Greenberg, which probably not super well known, although it does pop up if you look up, great baseball fiction. This is one that gets mentioned. It's the central character, well, one of two central characters is Christy Mathewson in his heyday. The Christian gentleman, right? This, guy who's going to bring civility to the rough and tumble game of the early 20th century, who has trouble living up to this reputation that's been set out for him. He's a little rougher around the edges in the book than the public image would suggest, but he does want to live up. And the other main character is a Jewish immigrant jeweler who befriends him. So you get, great portrait of early America, early New York, mobsters, anti-Semitism again, which got mentioned before, is a big thing, but great portrait of dead ball baseball, and like the first celebrity player probably in the sport. The first person who was somebody they were writing Derek Jeter like books about for kids to emulate. Before that, you didn't want to imitate your favorite baseball players. They're tobacco and spat and drank and poured around probably, but but it's a great novel. One of those books that is, even if you're not a fan of the sport, you become a fan during the period you read the book. You get it from the novel.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I have not heard of that. I have not read that, but I've got it written down now and sounds really interesting. And great baseball book. I'm going to go back to the well of books I have not read, but I have a story behind it. And this book is The Phenomenon. The full title here. The Phenomenon: Pressure, the Yips, and the Pitch That Changed My Life by Rick Ankiel. Rick Ankiel is a phenom, obviously title of the book, for the Cardinals, who came up as a pitcher, was like, I love young, strange, players. He may be the reason why I hate pitchers, though, or at least one of them, because you can never trust these people. But Rick Ankiel, I think, is a great American story. He came up as a pitcher, was absolutely, stunning, shutdown, amazing starting pitcher. 2000 season, gets to the postseason, everyone's broken, going up against the Braves, and they decide to have him pitch game one against Greg Maddux as a rookie. Doing well through the first 2 innings, and then loses it and can never throw a strike again. And watching Rick Ankiel lose his shit and just be unable to find the strike zone it's heartbreaking. And there's something about it that's like so intense. But then what's interesting is he goes back down to the minors, tries to fix himself. They keep trying and he cannot. I saw a video from the early 2000s of him in I think it was even AA, and it's just like ball. It's like 24 balls in a row in which he can just not find the strike zone. But he's like a phenomenal, athlete. So they convert him into an outfielder, of course, like you can do, because fuck pitchers. I mean, you can pitch well and you're strong, you can bat. In my theory. Anyways, he becomes an outfielder, makes his way back to the major leagues, comes up for his first at bat and hits a home run. Just like, this guy is everything. He is amazing. He's the great American story. He tried, he got to a point, he failed. He comes back, retooled, becomes like a superstar. He's looking like he's going to be the savior for the Cardinals, and then gets indicted in part of the Balco steroid situation, completely falls apart again and can never play baseball again. So I actually, at one point in time, met Eamon Dolan from Penguin Books at Frankfurt at the book fair, out in the courtyard of the Frankfurter Hof, drinking beers late at night. And I was telling him about how I wanted to write a book on Rick Ankiel. And I was like, he's the greatest, to follow his career and look at how wild this is and what mental processes went on would be super, super cool. And then a few years later, of course, Rick Ankiel writes his own book. I did not get to write his book. And this book exists, but to be honest, I have the audiobook of it and I haven't listened to it, in part because I'm like, well, I don't want my vision of Rick to be changed. But when I last played baseball as an old man, in a wooden bat league, I chose number 24 in honor of Rick Ankiel, my man with the yips, which just still, and to be honest, anyone who ends up with the yips, anytime the yips show up, I'm just in for it. I think it's just wildly interesting, what goes on in the mind to short circuit you so badly. That's something you've done for so many years, so many thousands and thousands of times, you cannot do anymore. Like John Lester throwing to first base, or that moment when Altuve couldn't throw to first base. It's just so crazy to me. I love it.
Yeah, it's super compelling. I remember that, watching that game, and just see somebody fall apart in front of 50,000 people,
and nationally televised audience. Yeah. Oof. Okay, Caitlin, your pick. We probably have one pick left for each person. So
okay. Well, I only grabbed 3, so I'm going to kind of mention a couple that there's one I want to read and kept meaning to pick up that just came out called "It's the Making of Bill Durham."
Oh,
which is just my reading as shelving, which looks fascinating and kind of story behind Bull Durham. I have not read it. I have put the book on display and shelved it. I can't mean to pick it up, but a couple I remember reading a while ago. I was just looking up one. So sorry for about Miguel Tejada, who played for the A's and was dynamite called Away Games, and it was making of a Latin baseball player.
Oh,
which seems to be possibly out of print, but with a fascinating biography about a player and difficulties of coming to the United States and kind of how players were selected from various countries, and brought in to play Major League Baseball. As part of the Futures game is also the, which is why I wanted to attend the Futures game. I thought it would be partially that reason. Another book, The Glory of the Times, which about the Negro League players, which is in my shelf. And I thought it was just a fascinating book. And it was about players that never saw, were probably better than a lot of the Major League players, but because of color of their skin, never saw playing time in the Major Leagues.
absolutely.
So there are a couple, and there are more. I mean, honestly, I think the last few years have kind of fallen out of step with the game a little bit. I think it's a little bit, part of it is living here and the Mariners just not putting a team that's almost kind of good enough on the field to play, but not quite good enough. And how the pricing has changed in baseball as a fan to go to get a ticket.
Yeah.
Which used to be incredibly affordable. I mean, even if I were to take the prices of 2000 and 2001 and 2000, early 2000s, probably about 2005, when I went to a lot of games. And then to now, it has changed dramatically. I mean, you used to be able to go in, James, remember, you could go into Safeco Field with like a backpack full of crap and snacks. And the only thing they restricted were water bottles. As long as it was empty, they didn't care. And I didn't care if somebody threw my bag, but now it's like metal detectors, and you can only, like, you have to, like, go in. James smuggled in a book. And then a bunch of local Seattle people, based bookstore people, and publisher reps went to a game recently. And I desperately wanted to go, but somebody had killer allergies. And I would have been with you, James, smuggling in a book.
That's right. I brought a copy of an advanced copy of Your Absence is Darkness.
Oh,
forthcoming from Biblioasis.
That it is.
In 2024, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Coming soon.
Not a baseball book.
Related to the field thing, one thing I've been lucky for is that the Cardinals games are always relatively inexpensive. I'm sure it's more than it was when I lived nearby and would go all the time, obviously. But even like a few years ago when we went and bought tickets, it was cheap. But PNC, or whatever it's called, the Pittsburgh Stadium, is incredibly reasonable because nobody goes to watch the Pirates because they blow. But you can go into the outfield to get seats for like $25, and you can bring whatever food you want. And people bring like literally like a crock pot of chili and just be in the outfield hanging out with everyone. Like, it's wild. It's such it's like the experience that you would have had back in the 90s and 80s, but still today, because it is a riverfront sort of like almost like public property sort of situation rather than a real,
that is amazing,
incredibly intense money-making venture.
Because my favorite...
nicest. Go ahead, Dan.
No, you go.
Well, I was just going to say that it may be the nicest stadium in baseball.
It's beautiful.
Gorgeous park.
And you can sit in right or in like the outfield on like the center. It's a weird setup, but if you sit in center and like center right, like there's like maybe 15-20 rows, like you're right there. If there's a home run, it's in your little area. So we've had so many balls come by, and like people throw them up into the stands. It's like really friendly. It's very family friendly for anyone who wants to go. And Pittsburgh's a beautiful city and great bookstores there too. City of Asylum, White Whale, shout outs all around. Dan, you're up, and I'm hoping you pick a particular book.
Well, hopefully it's the right one then. Since I only have one more, I'm going to talk about the most recent,
Yes.
which is 1934, the Chatham Colored All-Stars barrier-breaking year. So, when I was a kid, my granddad was blinded at the end of World War II. And when he came back, he ended up being on a blind bowling team with a woman named Dolores Jenkins, who happened to be married to a cook and chauffeur and former Sandlot star by the name of Ferguson Jenkins, and mother to a certain Fergie of Phillies, Cubs, Red Sox, Rangers fame, winner of 284 games, despite never playing for a decent team. And he's still, I think, the winningest black pitcher in MLB history. I'm pretty sure that if he'd actually played with one winning team, he would have won 300 to 350 games. He's sort of Chatham's one claim to fame. Anyway, Fergie Sr. And a good friend of his, Andy Harding, were often at my granddad's table. And I loved these guys. I knew they were ball players, but I also knew they didn't make the majors. So how good could they have been? I knew nothing about the color barrier at the time, segregation, the Negro Leagues. So I didn't pay enough attention when talk turned to the glory days. So my publishing this book, which we launched in May of this year, was a way to make up for that ignorance, because this is a remarkable story. In 1934, 13 years before Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, and at the height of the Great Depression, a group of black players from Chatham, Ontario, which is a working class town 50 miles from the US border in southern Ontario, along with some recruits from Windsor and Detroit, put together a ball team that tore up the Chatham Industrial League, made the playoffs, and won an Ontario provincial championship, making them perhaps the first black team in either Canada or the US, if only because this story could never have happened south of the border, to win a championship in a white league. Many of the players on this team, Fergie Jenkins, Boomer Harding, Don Tabron, Flat Chase, and others could have probably made the MLB if they'd been given a chance. Maybe one or two could have been stars. A few would go on to play in the Negro Leagues, including Tabron, who would catch Satchel Paige. But this team galvanized, the community of Chatham behind them and brought down a range of other barriers, and not just in sports. Players on this team became the first black policemen, postmen, and other positions in the city at a time when most black men could only work on the trains or as cooks or as wait staff of one kind or another. So it's a great unknown chapter of black baseball, in part because it happened in Canada. And the Negro League history, though it's really important in this country, really hasn't kind of made American awareness. And I think it's also been lovingly researched and written by Heidi Jacobs. So I think it's a book any baseball fan will love. And really, for me, it was also a way to pay tribute to these men, that I knew when I was a kid. So 1934, Chatham Colored All-Stars, barrier-breaking year.
Amazing. I know you sent a copy of that, and it looks incredible.
Yeah, thumbs up for me too.
Pardon me?
I said thumbs up for me too. I really like that one.
Yeah, I need to put that up.
Yeah. There was the Negro League. There's do you guys know the band that will intro and outro this particular podcast is the Baseball Project? They're like sort of like a cutesy band, but like one of their people is like former member of REM or whatnot, and every song of theirs has like is related to a baseball thing, and sometimes it's like a particular, like one is like a screwball. Let's talk about screwball. There's a song about the Yips, which will open this, and then there's one called Eraseable Man that's about Joshua Gibson, who is considered like the greatest hitter of all time, and that he was a contemporary of Babe Ruth, who I don't believe existed. And I think the man existed, but I think the legend is bullshit. It's just like drunk journalists making up stories. But he was Joshua Gibson playing the Negro Leagues, and people that saw both of them play would refer to Babe Ruth as the white Josh Gibson. So there's a lot of history there to be like recaptured and recounted, and like rejigger people's expectations or understandings of what baseball was, especially in relation to the mythological Babe Ruth. Yeah. James, you're up.
Yeah, this year is the first time that the Negro League stats are actually considered on the same level as the MLB stats, and they're working
they're
really
going too slow with integrating them, which is problematic. There's a whole story to be told there of like, why is it taking so long to get everything integrated into MLB proper? And why that's happening is really frustrating. But yeah, it is. It was last summer, wasn't it, that they made the announcement that the Negro Leagues were considered MLB equivalent of MLB in every way.
Exactly. So a quick side note, that one of the books that I wanted to mention is kids' picture book called "We Are the Ship" by illustrated by Kadir Nelson, which has just the most amazing art featuring all those fantastic players. So fantastic, even great for a kid, obviously, but if you're a grown-up fan, you gotta have that. It's on your coffee table. It's fantastic. And my last pick features a post-Negro League era black pitcher. Even though it's funny to keep mentioning pitchers because I don't really like pitchers either.
Yeah.
Weird. But Doc Ellis in the Country of Baseball by Donald Hall, award-winning poet and lifetime baseball fan, who in that book is writing, kind of a biography of Doc Ellis, who was a Hall of Very Good level player for the Pirates, best known. Wore his hair in curlers often, and is most famous, of course, as you guys probably know, for pitching a no-hitter while on acid.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Had, dropped a couple tabs, not realizing he was supposed to start that day, and showed up and walked a bunch of guys, hit a couple, but still did not give up a hit. So he was a total character, and Donald Hall got to hang around with him and write up his story. But it's also one of those things that's kind of a cultural history of the moment, the late 60s and 70s, Black Power, people who were stepping into themselves and being able to rest themselves before, even though they've been playing in the league for 20 years to that point. At least a few of them had. Just and poetically written. I mean, to use the cliche, just great writing in there. It's fantastic. I love the opening paragraph is one that I've shared in our bookstore there before. I love the sound of it. So, look that up. I won't make you listen to me reading from it, but it's worth a look.
There's that that Doc Ellis story is like so legendary and so fun, and every anniversary it shows up with like trippy ass like reel on Instagram of like the Doc Ellis experience.
Yeah.
And then I keep seeing ads. I can watch any game here in Latvia because I'm out of market, right? And I have the MLB subscription, so that's kind of fun. But their commercials are the worst. They've always been the worst, but they're worse than ever now because they show the same like three ads about the Hall of Fame and connecting these players, and they're super annoying. But one of them they keep talking about is oh my god, now I'm just blanking on the person's name. Yankees pitcher threw the perfect game when he was drunk. David Wells.
David Wells.
Yeah, David Wells was like half drunk and threw a perfect game. And every time that comes up, I always think of the Doc Ellis story and wish they lean more into that. But for my last pick, here's a book I've not read, but I've had not an easy time finding a copy. In fact, I think you can get it. I guess it looks like you can get it through Amazon, so it's not that hard, but whatever. That I kind of found out about only like a handful of years ago, but is Believe Nicks, 2005, the year we wrote a book about the Mets by Ivan Felt and Harris Conklin. Neither of whom are real people. Those are Jonathan Lethem and Christopher Sorrentino, who when I was talking to Lethem on a podcast, he talked about the book as like the book that he wrote with Chris, that they had decided that they would decided that year in 2005, they would write only about the Mets, and the Mets would win the World Series, and they would like cause us to exist slowly through like through believing and wanting it to happen, and dedicating their summer to writing about them. And of course, so some of the players on that team were like Mike Piazza, David Wright, Beltran, decent team, new manager, all looking good. And they ended up going, what was it? I just looked this up, 83-79 and finishing third in the NL East. So no It did not work. Their magic did not happen. The book was a failure, same way that like the team was. And I don't even know that like that many people know that this book exists. And another one that like it's vaguely in print, but maybe I don't even know that it is, but one that I think we should definitely reissue just as a way of like commemorating the kind of weird superstitious belief of baseball that goes along with everything else in fandom. Which just to add on to this, Dan, you mentioned the '87 Twins, who fucked them when
I totally agree.
Because they beat the Cardinals in the World Series, and at that point in time, I was loaded with superstitions. I would wear my hat every game day, and if they won or lost, everything in my life would change. And during the World Series, every game that I did not watch, they won. Every game that I watched, they lost. And it got to
That's heartbreaking.
It got to game 7. I was like, this is bullshit. Superstitions aren't real. I can watch this game. It'll be fine. And they lost. And I just said at that point in time that like you have to believe in whatever kind of weird
I'm fairly certain that is the moment your character was formed. That explains everything about you.
It does. There was one year, it was a few years ago when I went to Spain for like an extended trip for like a birthday celebration for myself and like a birthday present and see all the cities I hadn't seen. And when I was there, from the day I left until the day I got back to the United States, the Cardinals did not lose. And that was they made the playoffs because they won 17 games in a row and changed their playoff odds from like 17% to like 60. All I was in Spain for this particular period of time. So I know if things get desperate, I know what to do.
You can leave. How are they doing now that you're in Latvia?
Not well. They're, you know why? Because they don't have any pitchers, because pitchers suck. And to bring that full circle, the game that was tonight, or whatever, your night, my morning, I put all the games on like on the audio and fall asleep listening to them, or wake up in the middle of the night and fall back asleep listening to them. But Adam Wainwright, who won that game, the World Series in 2006, when he was a rookie, I believe, he pitched tonight, and he is old as shit, and he gave him 1 million runs, and the Cardinals lost 15-2. So things have changed
a little bit.
People age. Anyone have anything else you want to add on to this, baseball related or otherwise?
You play about the Lethem book, because that's one that I keep hearing about, and then I'm like, oh, I should find a copy of that probably out there, because I knew Jonathan Lethem years ago when I was a kid, and he was an older teen, and I was like, this guy's cool. He's got great taste in books and music. There was a Quaker Youth Conference center, and he was like this cool older kid who was, into all the cool bands, and he lived in Brooklyn, and I lived in Schenectady. So but his book on the Mets is the one I have not read.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We need to put it back into print. I've talked to him and Chris about it before, so hopefully we can actually make that happen in the very near future.
That would be great.
It'd be great. He also, just to plug, Jonathan, his Brooklyn crime novel coming out this fall, which I don't know. I hope both of you get galleys of that. Looks amazing. You do?
Yeah, I have
lucky
in one of my files. Lucky. I have 4 days off, so I maybe I'll get to that one. I'm going to read The Absence of Darkness, which I've had since Winter Institute.
Same.
And then the other one I've had since Winter Institute that arrived in my mailbox is Not Even the Dead.
Oh yeah.
And it seemed like a book I needed to read when it was warm out.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know why.
Yeah.
So
I can see that.
Yeah. Okay.
That book is fantastic. That book is really something else. Yeah. It is radioactive, is the only way I can put it.
And it's about to come out too, I think, in July.
It comes out on July like 26th or something like that. Whatever the Tuesday is that week. I keep saying that. 23rd.
You will see a notice about that one in the Madison Books newsletter.
Ooh.
Like,
love to hear that. These are good words. These are good things. I love it. I also, Jonathan, related to Jonathan, we work with his sister, Mara, a lot because she translates Catalan literature for us. And, her most recent book that we did was The Adventures and Misadventures of the Conquistador and founder of New Catalonia, Joan Orpi, which won the first Spanish USA Literature Prize for translation. So congrats to her. And she's absolutely wonderful. They're both, I know Jonathan too, and I think they're both just amazing human beings.
Yeah, I kind of knew Mara. Friends with my younger stepbrother and stepsister. She's a little bit younger, but she was friends with them.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Anything else?
Well, we got to do this again. I got like 50 more books.
I know. Anything you want to throw out there, just as like just a running?
No.
I think you need to somehow work in whatever spreadsheet he's got going as sort of like an attachment to this podcast. Directing
Email it to me. Email it to me, and I can do that.
Fair.
Because the man's done too much work, and besides, we want to pick his brain.
I know. I want the list. I mean, I wrote down everything everyone mentioned, so I can like put it into the show notes. But nevertheless, like having a longer list would be great, because if you do Google research things like this, it's not satisfying.
That great.
It's not that
It's all
great.
Chat GPT, just everything that everyone said before, regurgitated.
Yep. That's how we create the internet these days. So, all AI. But thank you all for doing this. It's
fun.
Time out of your 4th of July celebrations to talk baseball, but seems like appropriate thing to do. And I look forward to seeing you all in person again soon. Hopefully, if not sometime this year at Winter Institute, obviously.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. And I hope all goes well at the stores. Have fun at the All-Star game, and signing off. For anyone who's listening, rate us, review us, tell your friends, do all that kind of fun stuff. We will be back at some point in time. This podcast has been rather irregular, but it's going to become more normalized over the next couple months. So get ready and enjoy. Buy books, read books, listen to book podcasts, enjoy life. I'm out.